Welcome classic rock fans to another ranking video, a top 10, and today we're looking at the 10 greatest songs by Yes. In my humble opinion, of course. If you're new to this channel, please do click like, subscribe and check that notification bell, as in the words of Steven Tyler, so you don't miss a thing. Anyway, enough of this flim-flam, let's get cracking, shall we? Number 10 is Wanderer's Stories from 1977. This is just a delightful, whimsical piece. It was a top 10 single in the UK, by the way, written by Anderson. You know, Bertold Auerbach said, music washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life, and no truer word was spoken as regards to this piece. This is a fantastic example, like Turn of the Century, of just how well Yes explore the delicate aspects of instrumentation. It is restrained and economical, odd for a prog band, you might say. Perfectly constructed 3 minutes 50 seconds. It is often dusted off live and lends itself quite well to the unplugged forum, shall we say. But what I love about it is that it's imbued with this wide-eyed sense of childlike wonder. Beautiful, beautiful piece. Number 9 for me is Changes from 1983. This choice might raise some eyebrows, as some of the Yes purists are a bit sniffy about this album, almost as if they're being presented with a rather noisome turd. But this album brought a whole new generation to Yes music, and many of them actually started delving into the back catalogue. However, many of the Yes faithful didn't quite appreciate the MTV version, all mullets and chinos. Changes was instantly my favourite song on this album. It's both immediate and progressive, wonderful vocal performance from Trevor Rabin. And I love the arresting percussive intro at the beginning with Squire's wonderful bass line, especially prominent just before the guitar part that beautifully platforms Rabin's voice. It's a delightful song, one that regales us with that rather weary tale of love lost. And the chorus sung in harmony with Squire is obscenely catchy. But this all leads into the quite unconventional coda sung by John Anderson. One word from you, one word from me, I believe. All adds a sense of drama to the piece, I think. This all builds to one final chorus before descending to that percussive clatter once more. Loved seeing ARW. I got a chance to see Rabin, John Anderson and Rick Wakeman actually perform this number on stage. Number 8 is Awaken from 1977. Many Yes fans consider Going for the One to be the last great creative statement from the classic lineup. And this 15-minute final track with its crescendos is certainly the crowning glory of the album. Patrick Moraz contributed some keyboard parts to Awaken during the early sessions. In fact, he told author John Kirkman that I'd already exchanged some ideas for Awaken. But that's not to detract from the brilliance that is Rick Wakeman on this track, from the opening Baroque piano to the transcendent organ part, played in Cathedral near Montreux, I believe. All this broadens the palette of the number, and it effectively provides, in the words of one critic, a riot of instrumental colour within an otherwise beatific, dreamlike piece. Anderson has mentioned in interviews that he was actually inspired by Calvin Miller's book, The Singer, which he was reading at the time. In fact, he said, it's about the star song, which is an ageless hymn that's sung every now and again. There is certainly a transcendent hymnal quality to this number. Number 7 is Siberian Catchery from 1972. John Anderson brought the fragments of this to the rehearsals, but it's Steve Howe and Rick Wakeman, who got a co-writing credit, by the way, that drove the number onwards by beefing up the song's main propulsive riffs, before a kind of prog embellishment took place with the rest of the band getting on board with this. Anderson stated that Catchery means as you wish in the Yemeni dialect of Arabic, and Siberia gives it a sense of scale, conjuring up images of vastness, an untamed, mysterious expanse of nature, otters and gulags and things like that. Bird of prey, beauty begins at the foot of you, John Anderson sings in his familiar Accrington warble, and regales us with these oblique spiritual metaphors, which he goes to wrap up with the sheer brightness of his vocal performance, not to mention the wonderful melodic presence that this number has. This song has a grand scale, like Siberia, as I've already said. John Anderson said that he was taking the audience on a epic adventure. In terms of what makes this track work structurally, it's Chris Squire's busy bass lines and counterpoint vocal. Bill Bruford's drumming is detailed and places accents where you'd least expect them. Howe and Wakeman trade licks, which is at times dizzying. That's before we get to Wakeman's beautiful harpsichord lines. Stephen Lammer said in his wonderful book that this is the sound of Yes coming together. It's certainly the lexicon of progressive rock gaining form and momentum. Number 6 is South Side of the Sky. I love the non-musical atmospheric embellishments of this track, the rolls of thunder, the swells of wind, that of course introduce Anderson's double-tracked vocals. And we get Howe's wonderful complex riff chaperoned by bass and organ in unison. But what defines this track for me is that neoclassical piano part. Absolutely beautiful. I think they had some difficulty reproducing this live way back in the day. I think it was dropped after the Fragile tour, but resurrected much later on when the technology existed to actually help them recreate it live. Help them to realise the full grandeur of the piece on stage. What this number certainly evokes is a sense of space. I think it's fair to say that Kay began to sound a little bit out of his depth by the time we get to the Yes album. There are some synth parts on there, but it's largely Hammond based. And there was also some suggestions that there was some friction between the hard partying Kay and the more reserved Steve Howe. Of course, Wakeman enters the fold, who was somewhat misplaced and underutilised in the Strawbs. Chris Charlesworth, writing for Melody Maker at the time, said, "Wakeman is a keyboard king of the highest order. Without him, Yes, we'll lose all the powers of the show." Interestingly, the skeleton of Catherine of Aragon, not literally of course, the piece of music was actually called Handle with Care and was actually written for the Fragile album. Number 5 is Gates of Delirium from 1974. Swiss musician Patrick Moraz, I think, combined the showmanship of Wakeman with a strong sense of jazz fusion. This remains the longest individual studio piece that Yes have actually done. This number was actually brought to the band by Anderson in somewhat embryonic form. The lyrics are typically Anderson and sometimes waver towards outright gobbledygookery, fluctuating between genuine meaning with his usual obliqueness. Moraz's tone and palette really contributes to this piece, adding a sense of drama which is at times unsettling. The first vocal section, Stand and Fight, we do consider, builds as the acoustic instruments are gradually abandoned. I think we hear Moraz's first solo on synthesizer here, and by the 5-minute mark it all becomes a lot more intense. Around about the 10:25 mark we get Squire's thunderous bass and this clatter of percussive crashes which indicate that the battle has begun, and interestingly accompanied by Howe's soloing, which becomes increasingly atonal. There are many out there that find the Gates of Delirium quite a challenging listen, but most people agree they certainly enjoy that sense of denouement we get with Soon. It features some exquisite pedal steel guitar from Howe, and Anderson's vocal here is beautifully fragile. Number 4 is The Revealing Science of God from 1973. For many, Topographic Oceans is where it all goes to sea. It's a sprawling, eddying album that many consider a tad inconsistent, but this number is one of the band's finest, in my humble opinion. It's defined by the gorgeous guitar motif and the word salad-y of John Anderson. Of all the 4 movements, I think, on this album, this track is the one that's most revived in the live forum. We get some wonderful contributions on here from Rick Wakeman, especially during the Starlight section, which is ironic, really. I think Wakeman constantly disparages this album, referring to it as Toby's graphic go-kart or something like that. Yet some of his finest keyboard work is actually to be found on this record. It's beautiful the way the beginning with those chanted vocals and steady swell of instrumentation, all punctuated by Wakeman's moog squalls. Before we get that release of the actual motif itself, this is much preferable to the 2003 or 2002 Rhino remaster that started off with these ambient sounds. I think it kind of lessens the impact. And this one, of course, is the first of the 4 Hindu Shastras, What is Revealed. A perfectly open number for this rather baggy album, I think. And the whole thing finishes with the restatement of the main motif, which is a classically inspired technique. Certainly something that Yes were exploring at this time. This sprawling esoteric album was quite alienating for some of the fans who'd gotten used to the more melodic numbers that we got on Fragile. Certainly alienated Rick Wakeman, who basically said, to play music you have to understand it. I didn't understand Topographic Oceans at all. Number 3 is Close to the Edge from 1972. This is undoubtedly progressive rock's defining statement. Written by Anderson and Howe, drawing upon numerous inspirations, Lord of the Rings, Sibelius, Symphony No. 6 and 7, as well as Hermann Hesse's novel Siddhartha. Siddhartha was also an influence for Nick Drake's Riverman, by the way. And given the classical influences, the aforementioned Sibelius and Mahler, you You can see the foundations of this piece taking shape, as well as in keeping with the mood of progressive rock at the time. It was actually Steve Howe that came up with the refrain "Close to the Edge," down by the river. And Anderson then sort of added to all the imagery of the piece. I think he told Music Radar, it's all metaphors. And the opening tape loop and sound effects and keyboard part was actually inspired by Wendy Carlos's sonic seasonings. The opening section is quite atonal, really, with Steve Howe's guitar part jousting with Wakeman's keyboard part, which is equally bonkers, all seemingly unrelated to each other, punctuated by those vocal interjections by John Anderson. And we have to doff our cap to Eddie Orford, I think, who does a wonderful job on this. In fact, to quote Prog magazine, "Orford's splicing was genius, crafting a successful through line amid so many often conflicting ebullient ideas, patching together a rich, resonant tapestry." Marilyn Manson famously said that music is a special kind of magic, and this is certainly a magical piece. And Wakeman's compositional training is certainly apparent here. He virtually glues the whole thing together. This is far more sophisticated than anything the band had tried before. Number 2 is Starship Trooper from 1971. This multi-part extended song cycle very much points the way in terms of where progressive rock was headed. Those Starfleck guitar patterns supporting the robust riff contribute to the overall symphonic quality of this number. Part of Starship Trooper was actually lifted from an earlier composition by Howe called Ghost of Nether Street. But nevertheless, this song has us gazing at the firmament. W.B. Yeats said, "How far the stars seem." Well, this number seems to propel us closer to them. Howe's frantically picked guitar, which forms Delusion, was actually formed from an earlier piece during the Banks era called For Everyone. And Squire's vocal harmonies and distorted bass sound certainly broadens his sonic palette. Apparently much later on, Trevor Horn confessed to John Anderson that he'd never heard bass sound like that before. It was the dismissal, of course, of Peter Banks, who had actually fallen out with producer Tony Colton during the Time and Word sessions. This was a seismic moment for this band because they brought in Steve Howe, who really helped define this band's sound for those classic 70s albums. And Banks' style perfectly suited those first 2 albums, that post-psychedelic, proto-progressive hybrid. But it was Howe's inclusion. He was so versatile, such an inventive player within the classical as well as the rock idiom, influenced by the finger-picking of Chet Atkins and the clean jazz of Wes Montgomery. This is a thunderous cosmic excursion that wrenches progressive rock from the court of the Crimson King and sees us all heading skywards. And number 1 is You and I from 1972. From those opening harmonic chimes, we kind of know we're in for something very special with this piece. According to an interview that Anderson gave NME in 1972, he described it as hymn-like and said he was secure in the knowledge of knowing there is somebody, God maybe. Anderson's descriptions, much like much of Yes's music, is nebulous and a bit floaty, I think. And the beautiful jousting of the musicians on this number, from the Mini Moog flourishes and Howe's guitar providing counterpoint, all setting us up for the ornate Eclipse section, which is also augmented by Steve Howe's guitar and John Anderson's emotion-drenched lead vocal. The Preacher the Teacher is an interesting little bluegrass ditty, really part of this number, and Anderson's vocal is quite dry here, which provides a wonderful contrast to the rest of the track, especially in contrast to the swell of Wakeman's organ. Cue Sid James laugh. This is a cathartic number for the band and audience, and a number I always listen to when I feel I need a bit of a lift. So there you have it. That's, in my opinion, the 10 best Yes songs. I'd love to know to what extent you agree or disagree. Please leave your comments below. If you haven't done already, please do click like, subscribe, and check that notification bell, and share this video if you think anyone else you might know that might enjoy it. So I should just leave you with my closing salvo, which is, hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.